Hey there, guys. This is John Weldy from Religious Recovery, Indianapolis. And the chapter that I'm reading tonight is going to be about our 13 steps. There are 13 steps. Religious Recovery is a recovery program very similar to drug addiction program or drug addiction recovery program, Narcotics Anonymous, or alcohol recovery program, Alcoholics Anonymous. We're a program that's about recovery from the hurt and the pain that has been caused from religion. Not always addiction. Sometimes people have religious addiction, but even more so, various pain that has been associated with religion in people's lives. And we're not an anti-religious group in any way. In fact, many of us are still very religious. We're definitely still very spiritual. We don't hate God. But we have found different ways in our own lives. So I'm going to be reading from this book, Every Path Leads Home by Wayne Holmes. And this is the basic building blocks of our program. This is the 13 steps, and this is in chapter 11 of Every Path Leads Home by Wayne Holmes. Step 1. We recognize we have been hurt, disappointed, or abused by religion or the religious. We recognize we have been hurt. We begin by recognizing the need, not just the outward symptoms, but the inner brokenness that allowed for outside elements to bring pain and suffering. We search our hearts and minds for commitments to man-made institutions instead of divine connections established within the inner sanctum of the indwelling presence. We recognize we are spiritual beings created by divine spirit. When the divine is our parent, teacher, guide, lover, we find protection from hurts and strength to live by divine power. Blaming a person or institution is easy. Accepting the responsibility for our own path requires courage. Others can guide us, but only so far. We must find our way in the dark. Light is there for the seeking, or for the asking. Seek it within. As a youth, I felt a stirring to follow a spiritual path. I cloak those words now in spiritual language. At the time, my language would have said, I felt called to the ministry. The meaning behind those words would show you a young man influenced by his father, the minister of his church, and Billy Graham. I saw myself standing in front of throngs of people who were waiting to hear my eloquence and who would flock to the center of the stadium to make a commitment to Jesus. To this day, I admire the work of Billy Graham, and had my life turned out to be similar in any way, I believe it would have been rewarding. He has championed the cause of spirituality and helped thousands of people. My life appeared to be heading in that direction. Involved with my church youth group as president and self-appointed spiritual guide, I jumped at the chance to join a new group called the Impact Team. The concept was to form a choir of Christian teenagers from the church district to tour other churches on Sunday mornings. We hoped to make an impact on teenagers and encourage them to make a commitment to Jesus. Those on the team who felt a call to ministry were also given the opportunity to preach the Sunday morning sermon. My team would arrive on Saturday evening, practice, share an evening meal prepared by members of the church, and spend the night with a local family. Once, when it was my turn to preach, I was supposed to spend the night with a local minister and his family. His home was within walking distance of the church, and for some reason, I was in that home earlier on Saturday, probably because they'd prepared a snack or meal for us. When we drove to the church that evening for practice, I familiarized myself with the return route. When the rehearsal was finished, we were paired with our host families and were transported to their homes. Since I knew how to get to the minister's house, I asked if I could stay behind a while to study my sermon notes and pray. I assured him I remembered the way, and he agreed to let me stay. Darkness fell while I was preparing, and when I was ready to leave, my sense of directions that seemed so sure earlier in the day suddenly felt uncertain. Before long, I was lost. Strange city. Long before cell phones. No map. No way of knowing which way to go. I became concerned, then scared, then terrified. I did the only thing I could. I prayed, then bartered. Please, God, if you just point me in the right direction, I'll promise to... I don't remember what I promised that night. I only hope God forgot too. Following on the heels of bartering came begging. As I walked blindly in the darkness, first trying this road, then that one, my pleadings followed with deep sincerity along the river of my tears. Finally, I reached a spiritual crossroads. For a short period of time, I lost faith. There was no God, no higher power, no divine other. I reached the point of anger, and I challenged the divine. God, if you really exist, then get me out of this mess. And if you can't, then I no longer believe in you. My tears continued, As I tried to calm myself, I didn't know what to do. Alone and afraid, the only solution that came to mind was to stick out my thumb and take a chance that in the late hours of a Saturday night, I wouldn't be picked up by a drunken sex offender. The first vehicle pulled off the road and waited for me to get in. I strolled uneasily to a rusty old pickup truck, wondering what awaited me. Opening the door, the man asked where I was headed. Hoping my red eyes couldn't be seen in the dim light of the cab, I explained my situation. I didn't even know the address of the minister's home. He knew where the preacher lived and offered to take me there. I sat in silence, and my rescuing angel spoke not a word. Upon delivery, I thanked him. He nodded and drove away. My faith in an unseen force, call it God or Krishna or Jehovah or the Great Spirit, it doesn't matter. My faith grew beyond measure. I had trusted in my own ability to find the way home, but when that ability failed, I searched for help from beyond my physical strength. The man in his truck felt like an angel in his heavenly chariot. The problems of a lost teenager may seem small, but my crisis of faith was heard and answered by the overseer of the universe in a way that restored my beliefs. Religions fail, spiritual leaders disappoint, and our struggles are often misguided, but within the soul is the gyroscope of divine love, divine guidance, and divine power. When we think we have lost our way, that gyroscope reminds us every path leads home. Trust, search within, and it will take you there, even if the mode of transportation is an old pickup truck. Hurt, disappointed, or abused. I share but one example of being temporarily disappointed in my connection with the divine. The disappointment came when I felt I had to beg to get the attention of the divine, and that my spiritual belief in prayer was nothing more than childish imagining. It took what seemed like a small miracle to restore my faith. I can share other examples from my life in which religion or the religious disappointed me. Religious abuse resonates mildly with me, but certainly not as much as others, especially those sexually abused by a spiritual leader. We all have stories to share. No spiritual path is without pitfalls. Perfection has yet to be found. The recognition of the hurt, disappointment, and abuse is the place to start. The recognition that we want to move beyond religion to a place of spirituality that is independent of institutions and people is the direction that moves us forward. Step 2. Come to believe that the divine has no religion, is greater than religion, and can heal us from our hurts. Greater than religion. The recognition that the divine is greater than religion must be more than mental assent. Our hearts feel it, our spirits know it, and our intellect follows. Religion's attempt to define the undefinable, attempts to see the unseeable. The power of the sun can sear the eye's retina if viewed for too long. If we imagine the divine as a light 10 times brighter than the sun, then no mortal could look upon it. The only way to gain a short glimpse would be to view it indirectly, perhaps through a dark mirror or by reflecting the light through a telescope and onto a sheet of paper. But the divine is more than light, and the true essence of its being cannot be seen with the human eye. Occasionally, if we try hard enough, we may get a glimpse of its magnitude and feel it in our hearts, its essence. If we share those glimpses with others and they share theirs with us, we put together a fuller picture. We may never come to a full understanding, but we can have a bigger picture and a better appreciation. However, if we think our picture is complete and make a religion out of our beliefs, we shut ourselves off from further knowledge and understanding. The divine is greater than religions. He can heal us. We need spiritual healing. This is not a case of positive thinking. The illness is misguided religious beliefs. Although some physical illnesses respond to the power of positive thinking, spiritual illness responds only to spiritual healing. It does incorporate positive attitudes and positive beliefs, and in some way it's self-healing. But ultimately we turn to the divine to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. We may, when we are physically ill, try to cure ourselves with a variety of home remedies, but if those fail and the sickness seems out of our ability to cure, we seek professional help. Often, the professionals find ways to allow our bodies to heal naturally with only slight assistance from other remedies, and when that doesn't work, then modern medicine is available. When we are spiritually ill, we may try a variety of things to restore the spiritual balance. If nothing succeeds, we often turn to a religious group or a spiritual leader. At times they are able to assist when they are not able, and in fact, when their proposed solution seems to worsen the illness, we have no place to turn but to the divine. Truth is, even when spiritual leaders suggest something that works, they are not the ones performing the actual healing. The divine works with and through them to guide us to the healing of divine spirit, and the divine restores the individual to full spiritual health. From our hurts, Divine healing removes the pain of disappointments, hurts, and abusiveness. The divine works with us through the power of forgiveness to remove these ailments, as we'll see in the 13 steps. But the issue here is what draws us back to wholeness. We can be restored to spiritual health through the power of divine love. Step 3. Recognize that we are spiritual beings and decide to turn our lives over to that which is greater than self, referred to in these steps as the divine. Spiritual beings, the essence of religion and spirituality centers on the fact that we are more than flesh and blood. Without the spirit, or soul if you prefer, life is meaningless. We live, we die, no more, no less. Why bother with anything else? Some believe the spirit lived before birth. Some believe it never dies. Some believe the spirit has lived through many incarnations. Religious recovery does not tell you what to believe. No judgments are made as to which path is right or wrong. We do, however, agree with the basic premise of having a spirit or soul, and that the acceptance of that premise separates us from trees, animals, and non-sentient beings, because we are able to perceive, experience consciousness, have subjective experiences, and dream, both literally and figuratively. There is ample evidence to claim we are spiritual in nature. The physical cloaks the spiritual, but the importance of the spiritual surpasses our short-term earthly existence. Decide to turn our lives over. We alternate between two beliefs. We decide to live as if there is no divine presence, or we decide to live as if there is a divine order. We may try both paths, even bounce back and forth between them. We look around only to discover other people struggling with meaning and purpose. Implanted in our character is the search for something outside the physical that can unite with our spirit to provide the missing piece of the picture. Religion waltzes in with answers. Some satisfy, at least for a time, some do not. Turning our lives over to someone, some concept, or some unseen divine presence can be a frightening decision. To that which is greater than self. Many have turned their lives over to that which is equal or less than themselves. Blind devotion to a religion or a charismatic leader can lead to disappointment, anger, hurt, and bitterness. When we turn our lives over to that which is greater, beyond, and above ourselves, we yield to the driving force of the universe, to the nature from which we were created, to the divine spark that brought into being the universe and all that is around and within us. Referred to as the divine. Many 12-step programs refer to that which is greater than self as higher power. In religious recovery, we use the term the divine. The name is not important. Some use Brahma, Rama, Krishna. Some say Allah, Yahweh, Buddha, Jesus. Others might say Ahura Mazda, Quetzalcoatl, Biame, Jupiter, Zeus, or Brigid. All are efforts to name the nameless one. All in one way or another point to the belief of a higher existence, or a greater all-encompassing being that gives life, breath, and meaning to our presence. They also share another thing in common. They claim to have a way that points back to the divine, to have a path that leads home. This step begins the journey, or in some cases resumes the journey. Losing our way is more of an illusion than reality, but at times a reminder of what we are is needed. We are spirit. Some would say we are spirit with a capital S. Certainly the essence of being is connected to divine spirit, as was created by divine spirit and returned to the divine. Step 4. Accept that this higher power is understood in different ways and by different names in various religions and cultures, and open our lives to hearing the divine voice in any way it chooses to communicate to us. Different ways and by different names. In step 3, we considered some of the formal names by which the divine is known. The list does not include the less formal names used to describe the divine, names that give an indication of the different ways religions and cultures understand higher power. Abba, used in Christianity, was made popular by Jesus. It translates as Father, and the two words are often used together, as in Abba, Father. The expression is an intimate term and can be best thought of as Daddy. For Jesus to describe the ultimate being as Daddy irritated many of his contemporaries, but it brought into existence a different way to view the divine. Think of God as the ultimate Father with all the positive attributes, loving, caring, comforter, providing, but with none of the negative traits. Many Native Americans view the divine as an omnipresent, invisible, universal force. They celebrate the earth, air, water, and fire. Hinduism and Buddhism often add a fifth element, that which is described as beyond the matter. Beyond the matter is another understanding of the divine presence. We may also hold views of the divine that have not served us well. An angry God, a jealous God, or a vengeful God. Can our view of the divine evolve? Certainly we can change the image we hold of the divine. That doesn't change his nature. But by changing our image, we might be able to bring what is truer into our understanding. We understand that when we use words like he, him, she, her to refer to the divine, we do so because it's easier than repeating the phrase the divine over and over and over. Even though some don't see the divine as male or female, many still view him or her as having both feminine and masculine qualities. Open our lives. We return once more to the example of the blind men and the elephant. Each man had a different experience of the elephant. All were partially true, but none painted a complete picture. In step 4, we accept that the different ways and different names are images of the same thing. We open our lives to hearing, understanding, and accepting different worldviews, incorporating them into our evolving perception when possible, and rejecting them without prejudice when they don't seem to resonate with us. Any way he chooses to communicate. The divine has many ways to communicate. By denying the validity of different roads, we cut ourselves off from many of those forms of communication. By deciding that the divine speaks only through one book, one leader, one religion, or one nation, we limit divine spirit's power, omnipresence, and even love in our lives. In fact, the divine is not limited in power, presence, or love. What is limited is our ability to perceive, as if we're seeing through a glass dimly and believing ours is the only glass. Step 5. Share our struggles with others of like-mindedness, trusting that our anonymity will be guarded by all. Share our struggles. Finding others of like-mindedness is not difficult. In preparing this work, I often mention to people the concept of starting a 13-step program for religiously abused, hurt, or disappointed people. Most people laugh. One person I asked about the laughter said she laughed because she didn't think I'd have trouble finding people to attend. The idea hadn't occurred to me that many, perhaps even most people, at one time or another feel hurt, disappointed, or abused by religion or the religious, including, but certainly not limited to, religious leaders. Religions set up rules or guidelines to live by. Breaking those rules creates the occasion for the keeper of the rules to call into question our behavior, which is a politically correct way of saying we are judged and found guilty. Depending on the severity of the crime, the punishment and restitution can be simple or severe. Gossiping is considered a minor offense and often carries little or no correction. Murder and adultery often demand expulsion and the loss of one's religious credibility. Most transgressions and their punishments fall between these extremes. In sharing our struggles with the group, however, we do not gather to blame, defame, or complain. A simple telling of the details is sufficient. The purpose of the group is not to grumble over what happened, but to share in order to grow through the experience and beyond it. To forgive ourselves and others, no judging is accepted at religious recovery meetings. Our goal is not to judge, but to heal. Our anonymity would be guarded. Without anonymity, our meetings fail. We trust our brothers and sisters to keep our secrets. Using first names only at meetings helps create a safe environment. Creating friendships often helps heal, but use discretion in sharing too much personal information until you feel completely safe. Step 6. Take inventory of ourselves to discover any way in which we have hurt, disappointed, or abused anyone by our religious beliefs. Take inventory of ourselves. We begin the healing process by turning our gaze inward. The idea of taking inventory permeates the 12-step programs, and it finds additional usefulness in religious recovery. Taking stock of ourselves is healthy. A Native American proverb says, "Great Spirit, help me never to judge another until I have walked in his moccasins." I cannot know the reasons and motives for why someone did something to me, but I can know the reasons and motives why I did something to someone else. Most of the times when I have hurt someone, it wasn't intentional. Something I said or did might have been misconstrued. Nevertheless, we wound people with our words or actions. Before accusing someone who hurt us, we try to understand our own agendas for hurting them or someone else. The principle of what goes around comes around is at play here. First, we take stock of our own lives. Doing so provides a measure of grace, forgiveness, and understanding. We don't want to mete out accusations based on perceptions. No one knows what's in the mind of another. Look within. Check your own motives first and do not judge another until you've walked in their moccasins. Hurt, disappointed, or abused. Our goal is to heal ourselves and to restore relationships with leaders and organizations whenever possible. Occasionally, a word said in haste or in jest injures another to the point where they will not accept our apology. A quick check within to determine if we have been guilty of the same thing will aid in recovery. Time usually allows for grievances to settle to the point where an apology can be offered and accepted, but not always. When the hurts go deep, we offer time, distance, understanding, and love. We forgive ourselves and pray that others will one day forgive us. By our religious beliefs, we want to be right. With doctrine and a divinely inspired book to back our position, we boldly share the word that will save the world, denying the authority of any other book claiming to be divinely inspired and arrogantly thrashing any other religion that doesn't believe as we believe, act as we act, or sing all of the stanzas of the songs in our divinely inspired songbook. We have no idea the damage inflicted by our well-meaning but often misguided zeal until we discover the damage inflicted on us. The real reason we take inventory is to make amends to others, but also to be in a position where we can heal ourselves. Step 7. Choose to forgive those who hurt us in the name of religion. Choose to forgive. Notice that forgiveness is a decision, a choice. We can choose to withhold forgiveness, but ultimately that decision stifles our spiritual growth, emotional harmony, and mental stability. Forgiveness is difficult, and when it involves religion, the decision becomes more challenging because we have placed our faith and trust in the church and its leaders. We trusted that they would speak from love and always have our best interest in mind. Often we are not able to separate a leader from the religion, and we discard the entire package. Imagine, before the days of the GPS, that you asked someone for directions to Disneyland. That person assured you that she or he knew the way and would take you there, guiding you every step. Don't worry, the person would say, I know what I'm doing. I've been there before. Follow me. You put your trust entirely in that individual and listen carefully to the directions, what to do, where to turn, and what to avoid. Days, weeks, and months go by, and still no sight of the Disney Promised Land. Finally, your car dies in the desert, miles from gas stations, restaurants, and lodging, and your guide says, well, I better be going. Furious, you lash out in anger. Where the hell do you think you're going? You said you'd take me to Disneyland. Disneyland? I thought you said Desertland. Your guide gets out of the car and vanishes into the distance. Religious leaders are mortal beings, filled with all the frailties that make up humanity. The Disneyland guide's incompetence may have been unintentional or it may have been malicious, but does it matter? The result is the same. Had we stopped to ask others for directions before we began our journey, we might have discovered more than one route to our destination, and we could have decided for ourselves if we wanted to take the short route, a longer, more scenic route, the northern route, the southern route, or the middle way. We could have considered stops along the way, national parks, state parks, relatives, or friends we might have wanted to visit. Putting our faith blindly into one guide didn't bring us to our destination. Our disappointment is increased by our loss of time and money. If we believe the deception was intentional, our pain deepens. We choose instead not to forgive our guide. We hold on to our disappointment and let it fester. It grows from disappointment to anger and eventually rage. The guide moves on oblivious to our feelings. And having forgotten the incident, if confronted, that person may show no remorse, rationalizing it was a simple misunderstanding. After a while, we make our way out of the desert. We have a new traveling companion whose name is bitterness. He goes with us everywhere we go. He troubles us during the day and also during our sleep, and he won't go away. Finally, after a wearisome journey, you arrive at Disneyland. Your expectations soar again, but with a pang of regret. Something isn't quite right, and the park experience fails to live up to your anticipation. You look back at what went wrong, and once again, you blame your guide. Several mistakes can be pointed out. Putting blind faith in your guide, ignoring your intuition, and when disappointment came, failure to forgive and move on. The old expression, forgive and forget, is not realistic. We are human, and the ability to wipe our memories clean is not within our abilities. Nor should it be. The memory serves a purpose. If you fail to fix a leaky faucet, you will probably receive a large water bill. Memory reminds us not to let that happen again. Work with a guide who promises to take you to Disneyland, but who leaves you stranded in the desert, and your memory will remind you to choose your guides more carefully in the future. Instead of forgive and forget, the expression needs to be forgive and forgive. And forgive and forgive. Not that we allow the hurts, disappointments, or abuse to continue. Memory reminds us to stop and move on. Great hurts, however, require a greater resolve to forgive. When memory brings back the incident, it often brings back the feelings. Each time it does, we commit again to forgive and let go. With each recurrence, we make the decision once more to forgive. In the name of religion. When you deal with religion and its leaders, you deal with life directions. Our goal is to find a way from this realm of existence into the next. Decide to separate leaders from their organization. Seek wisdom from within. Ask if the organization the leader represents is still a valid road, or if the organization also misguided your steps. Make the decision to forgive the leader and the organization. Through forgiveness, you heal and move on. If you need to, choose another road. When you refuse to forgive, your journey becomes laborious instead of fun. And when you finally arrive at the destination, you may discover a measure of disappointment. Not so much disappointment in arriving home, but in not realizing that the journey, the anticipation, was supposed to be part of the excitement. Step 8. Seek forgiveness from those we hurt unless doing so would cause further harm. Seek forgiveness. Sometimes you're the fly, sometimes you're the swatter. Sometimes you are hurt, other times you do the hurting. On our spiritual journey, we play follow the leader and also lead the followers. We are guides to some, tourists to others. When our leaders and guides disappoint, we forgive them. When we mislead followers and tourists, we seek their forgiveness. In writing this book, I realized the overwhelming responsibility I've taken by assuming the voice of leadership. If my words lend hope and comfort, I'm grateful. If they hurt, I'm sorry, and I ask forgiveness. Please trust that the hurt was unintentional. I believe what I write, but that doesn't make it right. I admit my weakness and ask you to weigh carefully the advice and take what you like and leave the rest. I offer my words with an open heart, and I encourage you to test the words and decide for yourself. The Buddha taught for 40 years, and then encouraged his followers not to believe anything he said unless and until they investigated for themselves. We seek forgiveness in our lives in other areas, but for the purposes of religious recovery, we concentrate on our attempts not to be misguided and not to misguide. We hold our wisdom up to the light, knowing that truth withstands but deceptions fade away, unless doing so would cause further harm. Sometimes it's best to leave well enough alone. I knew a man who felt remorse for the way he lived his life, and when he approached the end, decided to confess his mistakes and seek forgiveness. Adultery was top among his regrets, and so he confessed his infidelities to his wife. Perhaps she knew of some of his infidelities, but many she was unaware of. The confession may have felt good to him, but it proved devastating to her. At a time when she was about to lose the only husband she'd ever known, he confessed his unfaithfulness with several women. Her ability to grieve his passing was tarnished by his betrayal. What benefit came of the confession? Even though he was dying, she felt like the fly, and he was the swatter. Her capacity to comfort him in his last days was diminished as she fought to forgive him for living the way he did and for dying without taking his sins to his grave. Better he had left his mistakes than divine's forgiving grace. Seeking forgiveness must be balanced by any damage that could be done. Confession is more for the one confessing than the one being confessed to. I recall Jimmy Swaggart's confession after his sex scandal was discovered. Whether his confession was genuine is not for me to judge. I hope it was. But was his confession appropriate, or did it do more damage than good? His behavior disappointed millions and hurt his family, toppled his ministry, cost people their jobs, and critically hurt his credibility. Was it appropriate for him to confess publicly? I don't know. Perhaps if he had confessed quietly instead of airing his laundry, things might have turned out differently. It is with grave caution that we consider the ramifications of the hurts we inflict. If Jimmy Swaggart listened to the voice of the divine in his decision to confess the way he did, then I trust his decision. If his motives were guided by anything less, then his confession was misguided. Shortly before his misconduct, he had judged a fellow evangelist, Jim Bakker, and called him a cancer on the body of Christ. Jim Bakker, however, did not retaliate, but said he found no joy in Swaggart's predicament. Those who trusted Jimmy Swaggart as their spiritual guide were hurt by his fall. Many forgave him and remained loyal. Others forgave but looked for a different guide. Some forgave him but left him and the denomination that had sponsored him. Some refused to forgive and left that particular religious gathering and its parent organization, and also abandoned their beliefs in God, their word for the divine. Their path home took a detour. When we, like Swaggart, are the fly swatter, we need to search for spiritual clarity and seek forgiveness. Swaggart might have served the ministry better if he'd confessed, sought forgiveness, turned the ministry over to another, and quietly gone away, at least for a period of time. The guiding principle of step 8 is this: do no harm, which also means do no further harm. Step 9, forgive ourselves for all harm we may have caused, even if it was well intended. Forgive ourselves for all harm. Forgiving others is sometimes easier than forgiving ourselves. Because I grew up with strong ties to religion and a desire to be a spiritual leader, the pressure for me to be perfect was ever present. Sometimes pressure came from my parents, sometimes from my church family, and sometimes I applied it myself. Sins were defined as missing the mark. And I often missed the mark and even the target. During the years prior to, during, and after my divorce, the pressure placed upon me for perfection took a massive toll. I had let down my family, my friends, my church, and most of all, myself. I let down the divine too, or so I thought. How was I to recover? Feeling like an outcast in all my familiar settings, I withdrew from my normal routines and sought refuge in solitude. My children were my main concern, and I maintained a relationship with them as best as I could. It wasn't easy. I'd hurt them, and they needed time to heal before they could forgive me. As far as my spiritual relationship, I struggled with the reaction of those who had supported me. They didn't know how to handle the situation any better than I did. We stumbled around, felt awkward most of the time, and did the best we could. Church attendance slowed to a holiday rate, Christmas and Easter, and an occasional Mother's Day. I took time to think, to contemplate what had happened, where I went wrong, and whether there was any way to recover. Reading spiritual books stopped for a time. Prayer was hit or miss, usually miss. Meditation was gone. In spite of all the heartache, frustration, pain, and guilt, I knew the Creator of the universe had not given up on me. I knew that my problems, as big as they seemed, were solvable. I didn't know how or when, but I knew in time my traumatized world would end and a new life would begin. The new life began in small ways. I placed one foot in front of the other and did the things that had to be done: eat, work, and repeat the cycle. People went on with their lives. A few reached out to me, some forgave, others didn't bother. All went about their own worlds, business as usual. It wasn't until years later that I received a better understanding of the power of forgiveness. Under the care of a different leader, one who saw the suffering I carried, I was offered spiritual healing in the form of forgiveness. We talked about the past, and she helped me to see things differently. I was able to forgive those who hurt, judged, and condemned me. Most importantly, I forgave myself. There is perhaps no greater mistake than withholding forgiveness from others or from ourselves. When we refuse to forgive, it returns to us in judgment, pain, and imprisonment. We are held captives in anger, hatred, and bitterness. When we refuse to forgive ourselves, it holds us in a vice of negative thoughts and feelings, even if it was well intended. We conclude this step with the words, even if it was well intended, almost as if it were a footnote. If our actions were well intended, why do we need to forgive ourselves? Many times, people feel their intentions were good, but sometimes their good intentions bring catastrophic results. Just because we meant well doesn't mean the pain isn't real if our good intentions went askew. Consider a woman who decides to do some matchmaking. She sets up her friend with a man she thinks would make a good match. In the beginning, her prediction goes well. They hit it off, eventually they get married and build a life together. Then, suppose this woman discovers the man she recommended to her friend has become abusive, verbally, emotionally, and physically. She regrets her meddling and feels guilty. Her intentions were good, but the result played out badly. The matchmaker feels she has failed her friend and considers all the abuse her friend suffers at the hand of her husband to be her fault. If anything were to happen to her friend, she feels she would never be able to forgive herself. Feeling responsible, she interferes again in the hope that she can convince her friend to leave her husband. Well-meaning again, we can imagine how this too might go wrong. The decision could force her husband's hands, and death or disfigurement could result. Maybe the husband had seen the error of his ways and decided to seek help, but before he could find a counselor, this meddlesome friend's action caused him to panic. Our first thought may be for the woman to mind her own business, but that too could go wrong. The point is, no matter what we do, we make mistakes. We are not perfect. We forgive those moments when we act out of poor motivations, greed, anger, hatred, jealousy, and so on, but we also must forgive ourselves of those well-meaning moments when everything went terribly wrong. Step 10. Seek tolerance, and when possible, accept all religious faiths without judgment. Seek tolerance. Tolerance is the first step towards peace. We take it deliberately. We make the decision to open our minds to differing opinions. What makes us so cocksure that our religion, our minister, priest, or shaman is the only one connected to the divine? What makes us so sure the religious gathering we've belonged to all of our lives has a monopoly on who the Creator is and how we are supposed to live? Why can't we all get along? I continue to ask that question. The answer comes back again and again, because we all think we are right. Therefore, everyone else must be wrong, and we'd better fix them. But in our efforts to fix them, they are trying to fix us. I'm reminded of a saying that goes, I love you, you're perfect, now change. Tolerance opens the door to peace among the nations, among couples, within families, and within our hearts. When we no longer feel the need to be right, it frees us. We tolerate differing opinions. We have our own, but we no longer feel the need to persuade another. Even though tolerance is the first step towards peace, it isn't an easy one. I'm not asking you to change your beliefs or give up your religion. I'm not saying I know the way, follow me. No, and I won't. You might be right, I might be right, we might both be right, or we might both be wrong. All tolerance asks is that you consider the possibility, as remote as it may seem, that there might be more than one way. That other roads might get you to the same destination, or that those roads, even though they may not work for you, might work for your brother or sister. When possible, we accept all religious faiths. The key word is possible. What or who determines whether it is or isn't possible? Each individual must decide what is possible for him or her to accept. Once more, we forego the question of right and wrong. We try to establish guidelines for what is appropriate and what is not, and it brings us back to the role of judge. Some religious belief systems seem ludicrous and, from our point of view, wrong. Earlier, I described several different religious assembly styles. Many of them I personally experienced. My goal was to be open-minded in an effort to find the treasure within each one. After my experience, I discovered the ones where I felt comfortable with the leader of the flock and the teachings. Those particular gatherings met my needs at the time. At times, I've also considered religious gatherings that didn't seem to meet my needs, and I was tempted to pass judgment or perhaps even laugh at what was going on. Then I noticed the way the flock was positively affected, and I said to myself, who am I to judge? That's what tolerance is all about, allowing all of us individually to search and discover the roads to the divine that meet our needs. In addition, if those roads stop meeting our needs at some point, we also tolerate and accept each other's decision to blaze a new trail. Without judgment. We come back to this concept, no judgment. We accept all decisions, from many gods to one to none, and by whatever name or names. We accept without judgment wherever a person stands and walks. This is the key to peace, and more importantly, the key to having a heart of love. As long as there is love in our hearts, we can tolerate differences of opinion. When we have love, we don't have to be right. We don't have to judge. We simply accept. All will work out the way it's supposed to. Love your friends, your enemies, those who believe differently from you, and be at peace. Step 11. Seek through prayer, meditation, and contemplation to improve our relationship with the divine, praying for clarity of mind, an open heart, and further ways to heal ourselves and our world from the abuses of religion. Seek through prayer, meditation, and contemplation to improve our relationship with the divine. Simply defined, prayer is talking to the divine. Meditating is listening to the divine, and contemplation is a combination of both. A lot is written about prayer in the Christian community, almost to the exclusion of meditation and contemplation. I confess my own exposure to meditation didn't happen until I read Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. The book came more than 20 years before my venture into the realm of spirituality as I now understand it. Foster opened my eyes to a new way of communicating with the divine, listening. I also questioned the value of my prayer life. It seemed like all I was doing in prayer was telling the divine what the divine already knew. I marveled in the discovery that I could hear guidance and direction through meditation, although it was a far cry from the practice as those in the Eastern religions understood it. I wonder if they struggle with prayer the way we struggle with meditation. Still unknown to me was the practice of contemplation, at least by definition. Everyone practices contemplation to some degree. When we look at a sunset, we contemplate the power of the force that created the sun. When we scan the stars at night, we consider the magnitude of the heavens and the littleness of man. In those moments, the divine whispers to us. Our unspoken prayer is, who are you? The answer differs according to the needs of the individual, but even in the silence of heaven speaks. When I left my birth religion and found spirituality, I discovered the power of these three keys of the universe. The divine guided, nudged, and prodded me, leading me into the practice of forgiveness and to other like-minded individuals. My connection with the divine grew stronger and my heart softer. Listening doesn't come easy for many people. Sitting cross-legged on a zafu meditation cushion felt eccentric at the beginning. My wife was skeptical and quick to tease. Over time, I came to look forward to the practice, knowing it was an opportunity to listen for divine guidance. My life ran smoother, stress decreased, and work became easier. The main point in the beginning of Step 11 is to appreciate the value of those practices in moving from religious rules to a spiritual relationship. Yes, a relationship with the divine, but also an improvement in all relationships in life. Many will find one form easier than the other two and will naturally spend more time with that practice. That's perfectly acceptable. Each personality needs to be sensitive to what works best. I strongly recommend, however, that we develop all three practices and spend time each day communicating with the ultimate Creator. Praying for clarity of mind, an open heart, and further ways to heal. The more time we spend with the practices, the more clarity our minds receive. In meditation, we seek to quiet the mad monkey mind. In contemplation, we open our hearts. Meister Eckhart wrote, "What a man takes in by contemplation, that he pours out in love." In prayer, we seek forgiveness, that we may heal ourselves and heal our world through forgiveness. Wisdom is knowledge coupled with love. Through contemplation, we acquire wisdom. Through wisdom, we know intuitively the loving thing to do. Power is courage coupled with wisdom. Not the world's power, but the power of the divine. Not power to change circumstances, but power to change lives. Power, wisdom, forgiveness, and love combine to create peace, both personal and global. These practices, if done consistently, reshape our thoughts, our emotions, our lives, and our world. Religion takes a back seat to the power of a man or woman who prays, meditates, and contemplates. To heal ourselves and our world from the abuses of religion. Personal healing and growth form the launching pad of spiritual deployment. As individuals across the planet build their spiritual arsenals, we prepare for a non-violent spiritual coup to bring peace to the earth. Before we join this army of peacemakers, we must first make peace within, healing our hurts, disappointments, and abuses from religious people and religious leaders, as well as from those who claim no religious or spiritual association. Anyone can hurt us if we let them, but healing is simple: forgive and be forgiven. Heal others by forgiving any and all grievances, and you will be forgiven and healed. Here is a simple affirmation you might try. I forgive, I receive. In the act of forgiving, our hearts open to receive. When we refuse forgiveness, our hearts close. Years ago, my wife and I arranged to meet several couples for lunch after church. The group grew as we invited additional couples after the service. We chose a neighborhood restaurant, arrived, and gave our name and the number of people in our party. We chatted as we waited, catching up on church and family news. I'm sure a sprinkle of gossip flavored some of the conversations. Time slipped by as we watched more and more people being seated ahead of us. Having just come from church, no one was quick to complain. After all, weren't we supposed to forgive and overlook minor infractions? The minutes turned to an hour, and then an hour and a half. People who had arrived after us finished eating and left while we were still waiting to be seated. Patience turned to irritation, irritation to resentment, and eventually resentment turned to anger. Finally, we were called. Someone on the staff knew we had been mistreated because I overheard a specific waitress had been assigned to serve us, one who was known for her ability to pacify disgruntled customers. As we took our seats, apologies were given by all staff members assigned to our tables. The miracle-working waitress added her apologies and also said the management extended their apologies and wanted to offer us free desserts. Anger overtook me at the injustice of their behavior, and I said bitterly, "No, thank you." Cooler heads than mine were present, and a friend said calmly, "Thank you, that would be nice." I love desserts. Some days I live by the philosophy life is short, eat dessert first. To allow my bitterness to take away something I loved was idiotic. By refusing forgiveness, I blocked my ability to receive. My friend's wisdom humbled me and embarrassed me, but in a good way, because I learned a lesson that day. It didn't matter. I didn't master it because it had come back from time to time to remind me that withholding forgiveness blocks my ability to receive. I forgive, I receive. That day I received a dessert, something sweet, something that made me happy. Spiritually, when we forgive, we receive a multitude of blessings from the divine and from our brothers and sisters. Healing the world begins and ends with the same principles of individual healing. When we forgive, we receive. Some see forgiveness as weakness, but it is ultimate strength. Some see forgiveness as too easy, but it is difficult and requires great courage. Some believe forgiveness solves nothing, but it solves everything. By the end of World War II, America had lost many sons and fathers. Our suffering and pain were intense, and we could have chosen to concentrate on our own pain and loss. Instead, we poured out our wealth to other nations and chose to forgive our enemies. We supported and were deeply involved in the healing not only of ourselves, but also of the world. Our forgiveness and selflessness propelled us into the most abundant and successful nation in the history of the world. When the power of love, forgiveness, and the golden rule are lived by individuals and nations, the basis for the healing of religious abuse and the healing of any and all abuses becomes present to the global community. As we will discover in a later chapter, spiritual healing through acceptance, forgiveness, and love also has the power to heal the world's religions and bring a peace that will encompass the planet. Step 12. Having recognized the difference between religion and spirituality, we strive to be true to the Spirit within all of divine creation, and to be a light to point the way. Having recognized the difference between religion and spirituality, Step 12 returns us to the beginning, distinguishing between having a form of religion but denying the power of the divine. We have used the term spirituality to define a lifestyle that is dependent upon a connection with that which is greater than self. We do not judge religions as good or bad, right or wrong, spiritual or unspiritual. We accept all religious paths, but recognize that what works for one person may not work for another. Personal preference and growth, as determined by a deeper connection to the divine, form the basis of each individual's decision as to what religion is personally the right religion, what religious gathering is right, and what spiritual guide or guides will best meet his or her current needs. At the same time, we recognize not only the potential for religious abuse, but the reality of its presence, whether intentional or unintentional. Our goal is healing. Restoration to the same spiritual path may be possible, but we also believe other paths may prove beneficial. I just lost my place. Even if the road moves away from traditional religion into new areas of spiritual awareness. We also believe in the benefits of distancing ourselves from organized religions. Many spiritual masters spent time alone, often for weeks or months at a time. We understand the difference between the terms religion and spirituality, but we also see a value in both. The community of believers, religion, offers support, teaching, guidance, fellowship, and worship. Spirituality offers an inner connection with the divine that at times seems missing from religion. It offers personal spiritual growth and peace. We strive to be true to the Spirit within all of divine creation. The Spirit of divine creation is the same Spirit that lives within everyone. Each individual contains a spark of divinity. Whether we fan that spark through spiritual practices is what free will choice is all about. To deny the spark in others just because they fan their spark differently than we do dims our ability to see their spark and tends to hide our spark from their view as well. To be true to the divine Spirit means to recognize we are in this together, for better or worse. And the best thing to do is learn by getting along. Simplistic, yes, but ironically, though one essential goal of religion is to teach us how to live together in peace, all too often religion becomes the source of our fighting. Our mission begins in the quietness of our bedrooms, our meditation spaces, and our home altars. We become a light to point the way by connecting to divine light. Once we accomplish a connection to the divine, our essence becomes our message. When we leave our quiet place to go about our daily lives, our light goes with us. There is no need to proselytize. We only need to be. Step 13. We follow the principle that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. The witness of our lives is the only message we need to carry to others. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. If the message of religious recovery is divinely inspired, there is no need to proselytize. There is no need for missionaries to go out and make converts, no need to knock on doors, pass out flyers at airports, bus stations, and malls, and no need to leave tracts in bathroom stalls. If the message is not divinely inspired, a quick death would be kind and appropriate. The witness of our lives. If our lives, the way we live, the way we treat people, the way we respect and honor all sentient beings are our witnesses, then words become secondary. There is no need to convince people of our beliefs or to try to persuade others to think as we think, act as we act, or worship the way we worship. When we live in accord with the divine, the difference will be noticeable and people will approach us. At that point, we offer them any wisdom, love-based knowledge, based on our intuition that has been seasoned by time spent alone with the divine. Never pushy, never aggressive, abusive, or overly assertive. After all, we don't want to drive anyone away. We don't want anyone to be in need of a program to recover from this religious recovery program. The final step also has two implied applications. First, we recall that we were, each of us, once the student, and when we were ready, our teacher appeared. In time, someone may come to us in need of our light, and then we become a teacher, sharing with those in spiritual darkness. Second, we are still students. And when we are ready to go even further along the path, the teacher or master will appear. That teacher or master may be another traveler, but it may also be the Spirit of the divine. In this way, we understand that all who participate in the program alternate between student and teacher, between guiding and being guided. And that is the 12 steps of religious recovery. So once again, that was a reading from Every Path Leads Home by Wayne Holmes, the founder of Religious Recovery. Religious Recovery is a 12-step program for those who have been hurt in any way by religion. It may be an addiction to religion, but more often it's people that have been hurt in one way by religion or the religious. We are not anti-religious in any way. In fact, many of us are still very religious and definitely very spiritual. If Religious Recovery sounds like an interesting program to you, then please, by all means, contact us. Wherever you're seeing this video, there's probably a comment section right below it. Whether you're seeing it on Facebook or YouTube or something else, there's probably a comment section right below it. Just leave a comment. We will monitor those comments. We have groups right now that meet physically in the Indianapolis area and in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. And we also have groups that meet virtually. Doesn't matter where you are at all. We have groups that meet over the phone on a phone conference, and you can be a part of that. If you have been hurt by religion or the religious, which many of us have, if you are in search of recovery, then please contact us. Either leave a comment on this video or go to religiousrecovery.org and send us a comment through there. Once again, my name is John Weldy, and I am from Religious Recovery Indianapolis. Thank you.